So we've been strolling minnows all morning long, mid-strolling, not getting bit. Fifth cast with a jerkbait, thump, like an 18, 19 inch trout. All right, y'all. So, this is actually a 6 cents provoke, but this is their smaller version. It's got a little bit bigger lip, diving down to 6 to 8 feet. I like that in these bayous this time of year. Not always, but just, depending where you think the fish are hanging at, whether they're up shallow or whether they're on ledges a little bit deeper. But that fish, again, told me something. We'll see. The way she hit it hard, hit it fast. We've been thinking we've been around fish all morning looking at side scan. It's always hard to tell when there's so much bait up in here. You see lots of bait, it's hard to see the trout and make them out in the schools and things like that. But I'm pretty sure I've been seeing trout and we just haven't been getting bit. So the thing with jerkbait fishing is, regardless of whether or not you got a deeper diver or a more shallow diving bait, you need to figure out the pause ratio, like the twitch to pause, how long you let it pause. The traditional thought process is the cooler the water temps, the longer the pause. Often that is true. It's not always true. I think a big important thing in our bayous up in here in the wintertime, or coming into the winter, fall, winter, is I like to look to see how active the pogies are, the menhaden. They're everywhere. You'll see them on the surface a lot. I see how many of them are dying, upturned sideways or acting sporadically. That makes a big difference. If I see a lot of them dying, and it happens not always just because the water's cold. Sometimes a cold drop or a big drop in water temps can cause that. I think there's just so many of them. It's just part of the life cycle too. They don't all make it. But when you see that, I like to pause more. To me, a paused jerkbait imitates a dying pogie much better. And so so point being, that may not always line up with really cold water temps. We're like 62 right now. We did have a big drop this week. And so maybe that big drop in temps stunned a lot of these pogies, but that probably would have been a couple days ago when the initial drop. It's definitely stabilized now. Not only do I love jerkbaits because they catch fish, but typically, I think it's two things that lead to them also catching bigger trout. Definitely could consider jerkbaits a bigger trout bait. That doesn't mean you won't catch numbers, but two things I believe lead to that is, one, the bigger profile. Most of your traditional jerkbaits are 5-inch baits. You can find them smaller, you can find them bigger, but typically I like throwing 5-inch baits. In this case, this is about a 4-inch. And then also the erratic action, the long pauses, I think it instinctively causes a bigger fish to recognize it as an easy meal. And big trout, big predatory fish are very opportunistic in that sense. Working a jerkbait is not difficult. You cast it out to your target based off what your depth is on the end of the cast. I like to reel it down, 3 to 5 reels, real fast reels. That causes that bill to dig to whatever depth it's kind of rated for. And then so that's a good start. You want to get to the depth you want to fish right off the bat. And then from there, it's just twitch, pause, and you just figure out the cadence. If you've ever fished a topwater, it's a lot like that, but it's just subsurface. But yeah, it does not take a lot of skill to mechanically work. There's levels to it and a lot of thought to it and a lot of learning and knowing when to apply it, how to apply it, that kind of thing. But make no mistake, jerkbaits are highly effective lures for trout, especially this time of year when the fish are moving up into deeper water, moving up the bayous and the rivers. You'll see here I'm working on a spinning rod. For me, with jerkbaits, Your traditional 5-inch and up jerk baits, they're typically a ½ ounce or so. I'll throw those on bait casters. For my smaller jerk baits, and it depends on the brand. Different brands of jerk baits spend different amounts of technology and money in their bait for castability. There's a sliding tungsten metal bead ball inside these baits that it allows, based off the design, will cast better than others. So with jerk baits, you get what you pay for. So smaller jerk baits, I like to throw on a spinning rod most of the time. Casts very well, feels like I can get a few more feet, get a little bit more depth. Often I'll have much lighter line on my spinning rods. Smaller diameter would get deeper if that's what I want to do, if I want to get deeper, and often I do in these bayous. So when jerkbait fishing in these bayous, I like to have on deck a deeper diving, and regardless of size, a deeper diving, so a bigger bill, anywhere from that 6 to 10 feet range. I like those for, well, essentially our bayous are basically a combination of straightaways and curves or bends. The bends, you get a lot of current going through there from tide. The bend creates more like an increased current, and you get holes there. Usually your holes are above and below, deeper holes up to 20 feet. Everybody's bayou is gonna be a little different based off where you live. And so that's protective in the wintertime. The water gets cold, a lot of fish will stack in those holes. Same with the bait. They're there for the bait also. But whenever you get a rise in water temps, the bait will move, and in between these holes you have straightaways. We call them straightaways. They're not always perfectly straight, but they are generally more shallow. Not as much current carving out, and so they'll be anywhere from freaking 5 feet to 10 feet. So, like again, when you get your little warm-ups, or if you haven't truly gotten cold yet, you'll find a lot of bait moving up and down those little straightaways. And those straightaways are where the bulk of our flats are. We have the majority of our flats. And so that's why I like to have two size jerk baits, or two different depth jerk baits on the deck. I have one that runs anywhere from 3 to 5 feet, and then one that goes from 6 to 10 feet or 8 to 10 feet. The shallower is on for the flats, and the deeper is for those holes, or mostly ledges. A lot of these fish, when they feed, you know, they may be sitting in 20 feet, but you might see some fish, and you can see this with side scan sonar, they'll come up the ledge. It'll be a steep ledge. And so they may be hanging in like 6 to 8 feet, but on that ledge. So they're not up on it, and they're not down at the bottom of it. That's where the deeper jerk baits are very good. You can parallel that ledge and bring that bait right down in that strike zone where that fish is sitting, and then kind of work it to whatever their mood is, whether it's aggressive or not. You can work it slow or fast. This is an example of one of those straightaways. We got a bend up there with a hole and a bend down there with a hole, but this straightaway, this is like 9 feet right here, and it's a big flat up here. And so fish like to get up on that flat and feed if the bait's up there. That's another tip I can give you when it comes to bayou trout fishing. They always want to get as shallow as possible to feed. If there's bait in a hole and bait up on a flat, you will always find more feeding fish up on the flat. It just gives them an advantage from a feeding, from an ambush perspective, that kind of thing. And that becomes even more prevalent when you're talking about your bigger trout.
Holy, that was like right up on that.
Yeah, we smoked that one. That's a good one. On a jerk. That's a good fish there, dude. Hey, I'm gonna need the net. Little school of fish. Got him in the jerk bait. Little trick when you're casting a jerk bait. So I'm casting up to, sitting in 7, 8 feet of water. I'm casting up to like a foot or two, and these fish are kind of nosed up on the slope. And but you kind of need to be up there. And so like when I'm casting up shallow and like a foot, your first few pops, keep your rod tip up. That'll cause your bait to slash, but it won't really dive too much. It'll actually stay neutral. It won't really come up because the lip keeps it from coming up, but it'll stay at the depth. And then as you come down the slope, then you can bring your rod tip down and start slashing with it, and it'll dive down the slope. There's one.
Way down there. You want the net?
Yeah.
I'll put that there because I gotta get this guy.
It's a nice one. There we go. There we go. Nice fish, y'all. Jerk baiting. 18-inch fish. So that fish was on a bigger, shallower diver. It's a Lucky Craft. Again, the color patterns I'm using on these are very shad-like or pogey-like. Your blues, silvers, grays. Water's real clear, so that's why, in my opinion, that's matching the hatch of the bait fish they're eating in here. So another thing that's happening right here is an example of, like I said, I get bigger bites with the jerk baits. Again, you will still catch smaller fish, but I do get bigger bites. My son is like mid-stroke slash just bouncing a, like 4 or 5 inch shad type bait on the bottom. He's actually catching more numbers than me. Not by a ton, but he is catching smaller fish. His biggest is 17, and using the jerk baits, I got a 19 and 18 so far today, but not as many. So, you get in a good feeding frenzy, then, maybe that's not the case. It all comes out in the wash, but point being is kind of figure out what you want to do, Are you just trying to fill a box with eaters, then maybe go with the plastics. I'm trying to get a little bit bigger bite, so I'm throwing the jerk bait. But keep in mind though, as we get colder in the bayous in the wintertime, water temps get colder, there are times where you're not going to get bit on a moving plastic near as well as you will with a jerk bait. Jerk bait with a long pause, you can catch not only good fish, but a lot of numbers that way too. There it is. There it is. Not near as big, I don't think. Doesn't feel as big. It's going that way. Yeah. About 15, 16-inch fish. Oh, it got off. Oh well. We ain't keeping, so it's all the same. Wanted to show you guys it, but you've seen a 15-inch trout before. One thing with any sort of cadence type retrieve, so with like top waters, the same with top waters as it is with jerk baits, twitch baits, make sure that once you dial in the retrieve they want, the length of pause, the twitch, how many twitches, once you're pretty confident that what you're doing is getting bit, don't let adrenaline and excitement speed that up. It's very easy to do. And so just the best way to combat that is just to be thinking about your cadence, immediately, after you catch a fish or what have you. It's easy to go 10, 20, 30 minutes before you even realize you're blazing away with the twitch count and speed and retrieve speed and all that stuff. and it may be way too fast to get bit. So the other reason today, specifically here on the bayou we're on here in South Mississippi, coastal Mississippi, that the jerkbait is working today is due to these pogies are way up in the water column. And so we actually can see on side scan and down scan these trout coming up and eating these pogies. Also, as we've been fishing plastics, as we're finishing our retrieve, getting ready to reel it in real fast, get back in the boat, you'd get hit. And so these fish are kind of positioned up in the water column, suspended, but not suspended doing nothing, where fish can be lethargic, but suspended up to actually eat the bait. And so that's where a jerkbait really shines, getting down to, and you can mix it up, like I said, with shallow or deep divers, and kind of put that pogie shad imitating bait kind of in the same area that they're feeding in the upper water column. And sometimes you can do that over 10 feet of water, and I may not even be 3-4 foot deep. If the fish are already pre-positioned and they're not on the bottom, that's why that works. It's much tougher to get a fish to come up from the bottom up to 10-15 feet up. That's a lot of, they gotta be super aggressive to do that. But if they're already up there, you can present this to them. Hey y'all, another little tip on jerkbaits. So today, like I mentioned already in the video, I'm using 2 different brands, 2 different diving styles. One's a deep diver by 6 Cents, and then I got a Lucky Craft that's a little bit shallower. One Lucky Craft is 3 to 5 foot. The 6 Cent right now is 6 to 8 feet. And so we fish saltwater, and saltwater has salt in it, salinity, and that salinity, when you move into our bay systems and bayous, it fluctuates based off rain and rivers and all those things. And so salt in the water makes things float, makes hard baits float. Even though these, especially high-end or quality brand jerkbaits, if they're advertised as suspending in fresh water, they will generally suspend. Different ball game in saltwater, and just it's kind of a crapshoot too. One brand may slow float or suspend, the other may not. So I use a product by Storm Baits called the Suspended Dots. They also make a suspended strip. It's basically adhesive lead strips that you can put on the bottom of your baits like that. And it's really easy. They put on easy and come off easy. It takes seconds. Neat little package. And so, for example, today I've got my deep diver. It's advertised as suspending. It is a slow float without any suspended strips. That is not 6 Cents' fault. That's just the salinity I'm fishing in. And so I found that 2 dots on this bait today keeps it perfectly suspended. This is my deeper diver. It's more important for me to have this perfectly suspending for the trout that I'm fishing. These trout are up feeding on, they're up suspended themselves, feeding on pogies in the upper water column. And so when I get that bait down to the depth I think they are and I stop it, I want it to sit right there, and it makes it look like a dead or dying pogie. I don't want it to rise. This other bait, this Lucky Craft, I'm throwing this up shallower, up on ledges, and because there are some fish that are positioned up on our ledges more shallow, and it's actually been bigger trout. So this, out of the package, is a pretty fast rise, even though it's advertised as suspending. And so I throw 2 dots on there. There's only one, but when I threw 2 dots on there, it actually suspended pretty well. But quite often I've got grass and aquatic vegetation up on the shallow ledges. And so I actually just went with 1 suspended dot, and now I've got a slow rise, and it just works really well in the 3 to 4 foot level I'm fishing anyway. So it keeps a lot of the junk off the bait, keeps the bait above these trout that are kind of up in shallow water looking. So point being, in summary, as you're probably picking up, these suspended dots add a lot of versatility, takes no time, it's super, within seconds, you can take them off, put them on, whatever. And as you move up and down our bayous and you have different salinity, you may need to do that. If I'm 10 miles up a bayou, lower salinity, I only needed 1 suspended dot, I come back down, get on trout. If you look at your bait in the water, it might start all of a sudden floating, right? So it's just salinity. So quick little tip, buy yourself some Storm suspended dots, and use them for your jerkbait fishing all fall and winter long. One of the things it's also important to realize about jerkbaits, it's not just another lure you can throw, especially if you're somebody that's got confidence in your plastics or whatever. It has a specific job that it performs. And so, for example, today my son and I have been mid-strolling. You guys have heard me talk about that. That's a plastic on a jig that we're kind of keeping it at various parts in the water column, twitching it, but keeping it up, but it never stops moving. We've fished paddle tails on the bottom, swim baits bouncing on the bottom. We've even taken those mid-stroll and straight tails and bounced those on the bottom. My son has had some success with those. But none of those presentations have ever brought a bait down and paused it in front of these fish and have it just sit there, right? So they're just not capable of doing that. Anytime you stop swimming a plastic, it sinks, right? And the sink often generates a bite, but it doesn't always. And so, point being, this is a specific tool that can augment as you're trying to break down and figure out how to get these fish to eat. That has a specific job that it does differently from the other baits, other lures. So we have a tendency to be like, you know, what I got works, that kind of thing. Just keep an open mind. There's you know, nothing wrong with avoiding buying a ton of lures, especially if many of them are redundant. But it is important to have different categories out and available to kind of break down a fishery. It absolutely helped us get on trout today. We were having very little success working plastics in different ways. And then once we started dialing the jerkbait in, we'd have a pretty good box of fish if we were keeping fish today.